Before we get into cohabitation agreement, what's the difference between cohab and a prenup? Every time I say prenup, I want to sing, "We want prenup."
Well, they're really going to do the same thing. Prenup is in contemplation of marriage, and cohabitation is in contemplation of moving in together.
Yeah, because no one talks about cohabitation agreement.
You know, it's interesting because historically we had very few people asking about them, but I find this newest generation of homebuyers coming up, they're way more interested in it, and we get asked a lot more about it than we used to.
Now, that'd be coming from us, their parents.
I would say it's probably because their parents are often divorcing, because our parents' generation didn't, right?
Yes.
But I do find that we have more like late 20s, early 30s that are asking about it. 20 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about that unless you'd been burned the first time. And then, you tend to have it the second time.
So like a good conversation. So let's say if I had kids and they are going to inherit my estate. And let's say little Jimmy gets a couple $100,000. If Jimmy gets that $100,000, he's now living with, Susie. They break up. She has claim. Yes, no?
Maybe. Generally, an inheritance isn't considered a marital asset if they are married, assuming they get married. But when you take that and you muddle it, so if you take that and you start using it and you live from that money, or you put it into your house, then you've definitely put that money at risk. It's a little bit different between cohabitation and marriage. Like when you get into marriage, there's some automatic rights in there, like in particular to the marital home, unless you've got an agreement that says otherwise. Cohabitation is really kind of more geared towards like equity, like think about fairness. What I say to people all the time is just because someone doesn't have an automatic right to the house doesn't mean they don't have a right, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to cost you a lot of money to defend it. And a lot of times what we find is I look and I go, that your ex really isn't entitled to a whole lot, but if you go to court on this, you're going to pay them more than what they're asking for, and reluctantly they end up cutting a check on it.
So let's say I buy Johnny a house. I don't even think I would call my kid Johnny, but I'm just using that just to make it simple. I buy Johnny a house. Now he meets up with the missus. They live together. Let's say the mortgage, they have a bit of a mortgage and it's, $2,000 a month. 5 years, they break up. What is Susie entitled to?
Well, it depends. So, starting point is it's a marital home, so she can try to claim 50%.
No, they're not married.
So if they're not getting married,
they're just living together.
It would depend on if she contributed to the property, if she contributed to the household. So again, this is the problem, is it gets so fact specific. So what we would say to people in that circumstance is, and I've had this discussion lots with my single buyers, is say, before you move somebody into this house, I want you to call me, and we're going to talk about how we can protect your interests. And in particular with that, like if I were to gift a property to my children, I would say, I'm going to be the mean one, and you can say that it's my rule because I gifted it to you. And the only way that someone's getting in that door is if they sign something that makes it clear that this stays mine, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's, after a certain number of years, you get a certain % interest, or maybe you get anything that you've contributed back. It doesn't have to be straight up, everything stays Sandra's. It can be, you can get a 10% interest in it, or I acknowledge you put $20,000 towards the roof, so you'll get that back. But I personally wouldn't let somebody get in my door without having an agreement, married or not, particularly if we were getting married, because I already have children. I'm already in a second marriage, so this is something that my husband and I talked about before we moved in together. Was I have to look after my kids, so if this doesn't work out, I want to make sure that my kids are protected over here and that they keep all these assets.
Which just makes sense. So what if I sign a cohab agreement, never get married? We've been together now 10 years and we break up. I had bought, we'll go back to Johnny, my son. and, you know, I had bought this house for Johnny, and, you know, they've been paying down the mortgage and whatnot. Is she entitled to anything after 10 years and they're never got married, but they have that cohab?
If they have the cohab, it's going to depend on what the cohab says. Now, like anything, nothing is bulletproof. So somebody could always try to challenge something. So what we like to do is when we do these agreements, well, we always say we want the other party to get independent legal advice. So we say, okay, Susie, we've drafted this for Johnny. You need to go and you need to see another lawyer. And they're going to explain this to you, and they're going to give a certificate saying that you completely understood what you were signing. Sometimes they'll come back and they'll negotiate, and that's okay. You know, maybe you just say no. I said, generally, if I'm the one that owns the house, I'm like, cool, then you don't move in. So usually you get what you want when you're doing the cohabs if you're acting for the person that owns the property. But ideally, you get that independent legal advice, and it makes it harder for somebody to challenge something. But typically speaking, if you've got that cohab, it makes for a nice, clean breakup. And I say to my clients, you know, worst case is you need it and you know where you stand. And best case is you never need it at all and you don't have to worry about it. So you really can't go wrong on it.
Yeah. Are there like really uncomfortable situations, like where conversations when people are initially coming in to sign it? Are they afraid to sign it? Like what's?
It's not a nice conversation. I try to make it as nice as I can, and I say, you know, blame me.
Yeah.
You know, when you go home and talk to, because often I'm not seeing the common law partner at all because they're not a spouse. I just know that they're moving somebody in or they're coming to me afterwards. I say, you know, blame me. Say my lawyer really says that I really need this, or blame the mom or whoever is pushing for it. And, you know, say my lawyer says that we should do this, this, and this. And it protects both parties. You know, like I say, I have a cohab. That's to protect Wayne from me, too.
Yeah.
You know, so I can't claim on his assets. He can't claim on my assets. So kind of when you word it that way, you know, it's not just I want to keep all my stuff, but you also keep all your stuff. So, you know, maybe you're saying, okay, I keep the house unless you put money into it, and then you can get that back. But you keep all your investments, and you keep your cottage and all these other things that you might have. And you can always change these things later on, and we'll do that sometimes. Like people will do it initially and say, everything is mine, everything is yours, the end. And then they'll have children and they'll come in and they'll go, you know, I don't quite like that. I want it clear that this is what happens if we split. Like nothing like that is permanent if you want to change it, but you both got to agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you change it.
And what would you say are the most common disputes that come up when you know, unmarried couples, when they're splitting, like when they're in your office talking about real estate?
Oh, it's always the proceeds. We're forever having the proceeds dispute, to the point that in our opening letter we actually ask, are there any disputes that you anticipate with regard to the proceeds? Because we need to know what we're getting into. Because when you go in on a sale, you're going to be asked to sign a direction as to where the funds are going, and you need to agree on that. And really, like, because a lot of times it's not just, you know, the house, there's $100,000 in equity in the house, you're looking at other things. So there's debt, and there's, you know, other property, and, you know, you're looking at differences in salary and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of times when they're selling and they're separating, like ideally they already have a separation agreement in place that deals with all this, so you're not fighting over it as you're getting into closing day, because that creates a lot of pressure on a client to try to figure out what they're going to do with this. And sometimes you have people that at some point they're like, you know what, I'm not going to sell it, then forget it, I'm not going to sign it.
But you have to sell it because there's penalties.
Oh, we know this. But as you know, people get very emotional and they can get very reactive, and sometimes people just really want to stick it to the other person. And if you think, you know, maybe it's just in my name and it's my ex is like, you know what, I'm not going to sign off on that. It doesn't affect my ex, other than the proceeds aren't going to go to them, but maybe there's not a whole lot of proceeds there anyway, so they're just going to use that as an opportunity to get something else that they want, because they know that I need this signed off on. So, you know, ideally, you've got all that sorted out ahead of time. You're not going into it not knowing where you stand, because your client might find themselves kind of under the gun, so to speak, with that.
Yeah, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but from our generation given to our kids would be the biggest transfer of wealth, or is it the baby boomers?
I think it's the baby boomers, and that's a lot of what I'm seeing is like my parents' generation.
Oh, they like say someone 64 would still be a baby boomer.
Yeah,
That's
well,
right. The old man is 64.
What am I called? I don't know.
I think you're X, Gen X, maybe.
40 something.
Grumpy like me, who knows? But
I am seeing a lot of that. Like people like kind of like 70,
okay, boomers.
65, 70 plus, conveying down to their children and doing in-law suites in the property, or doing, you know, kind of planning on putting something else on the property and kind of all living together, or refinancing their homes to take funds out and give it to their children so that they can buy their first houses or upgrade their houses.
And if they're doing that, I think it's so smart. So I didn't know anything about a cohab agreement until you brought it up, and you know, and we signed it. It was easy peasy, and I mean, not everybody gets along and have those open conversations.
When you're signing it, everybody's happy. You're in love. You're moving in together. No problem. I agree. The time is when everybody's happy to get the agreement on it. It's not when everybody's sad on the back end and there's other girlfriends, boyfriends, people involved, kind of in people's ears, and you know, a lot of. This is where things can kind of go sideways. So I say, you know, everybody's happy now, everybody's agreeable. You're not down any kind of road yet because you're not living together, or maybe you're already living together, but you're thinking it's time to kind of get it sorted out. That's the time.
And even if you're in an apartment, you're still probably going to grow equity in, you know, investments or whatever.
Well, people say that all the time, like, I have nothing. I'm like, you have nothing now. What are you going to have later on down the road? Best to have it now to know where you stand if things go sideways, right? And when you are doing things, like if you've got a parent transferring down, you know, as a parent, if I was doing that, I would want something from my child's partner saying, no, I acknowledge that big equity transfer from my mom stays with these people and doesn't go to me. Before I would even agree to do that, it would be something saying, you know, this is Lila's or this is Evan's, not yours. I'm sure you're lovely in-law, but you're not getting it. And, you know, they, in theory, shouldn't have a problem agreeing to that. And I say to people, I'm like, if they do, then you should ask yourself why.
I agree. So I think it's parents needing to protect their kids, and it's the kids need to protect themselves.
Yeah. I see a lot of people a second time around. They go, I'm not going to do that again. It's the second time around. They're like, getting a cohab this time because this is what happened to me last time. Yeah. And you know, we do a little bit of family law, and I don't typically do it, but I know that's the conversation that we have in the office. Was next time.
This is what we're doing.
See me beforehand, and we'll help protect you, so you know where you stand on it.
That's really good advice. Well, thank you once again.